Hello there, JAMESON of whiskey lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Kept my smoky tie on because I am doing a mashup with a smoky whiskey and a non-smoky whiskey. Interesting thought here as I was doing my tasting on KILCHOMAN Machir Bay is that this whiskey has two notes that really stand out to me. It has a medicinal smoke quality to it that's just nice and pleasant throughout the entire range, and then it also has a little bit of a citrus note in there, lemony kind of a note, and on the finish you get this cocoa note that comes in, chocolate note that comes in. And so I got inspired about, while I was talking about these tasting notes, thinking that if Machir Bay is not really aggressive in other flavors other than smoke, then it would be a great vehicle for, actually it wouldn't be the vehicle, it would be the passenger to another whiskey that just felt like it might need a little extra something. Or wouldn't it be interesting if we added a smoke character to another whiskey and see how it does? And I've got a friend of mine, Jason, who has actually used Laphroaig in Jameson, regular Jameson, and said that it worked pretty well. So I guess my brain was firing and saying, okay, wait a second, Jameson, wouldn't it be interesting to see how the hoppy Jameson IPA version, which isn't overly hoppy, it's not overly aggressive in any way, but has some nice kind of citrusy kind of notes and some honey, and comes across as a very pleasant whiskey. If we gave it a little personality, kicked it up with a little bit of smoke. And what better whiskey to do that with than KILCHOMAN's Machir Bay. I have not tasted this whiskey yet. I have let it sit for about 20 minutes. I haven't really stirred it around or anything. I've just kind of let it sit in that glass and wait for me to taste it. Now, I will tell you that of this glass, probably 90% of it is Jameson with about 10% Machir Bay. And this is the thing that you have to realize about smoky whiskeys is they can take over a whiskey in a heartbeat. So you got to be very careful with them. You'll end up basically with just a big pile of smoke in your whiskey. So I just want a hint of smoke. I don't want it to overdo it, but I just want to add another element to the personality of this IPA edition Jameson, because I think it's a good whiskey. I just, it's not outstanding. It just is an easy drinker. And I thought, well, I love smoke. Why don't I add a little smoke to it and see if it works? So this may be a train wreck. It may end up being inspired or somewhere in between. So on the nose, I get a lot of lemon, and I get that little bit of hoppiness in there. I really don't get smoke. I get soap. It's really interesting. I'm getting a soap note. I have to go back and smell the IPA edition and see if on its own it has that soap note, because I didn't notice that the first time. And no, it's not Irish Spring. Maybe. You can smell a little bit of smoke in there, but man, that lemony, sudsy kind of, it's almost more like dishwashing liquid, I think, is what I'm kind of smelling. Yeah, the smoke's there. It's just, it's kind of lingering underneath, adding a very interesting element, and it blends in there pretty well. We'll see how it does once I get it on the palate. Nice vanilla's coming through that I didn't really notice the first time that I tasted this. The hoppiness is kind of dissipated. It's not really smoky though. And now there's like a bitter note that's coming in. I'm going to do this on the fly. I took a pretty good sip of that, but that smoke is just not really there. Maybe let's kick it up a decent amount. So now I'm saying it's probably about 20% of this glass is, or maybe even more than that. Enough that now I'm getting the medicinal note, which is an interesting pairing with that hoppy note. The hops are light. I'm getting that weird latex paint note. Isn't that interesting how this has kind of evolved with, old shoe leather. I'm getting notes I would not have expected in a million years out of this. Dear Lord, that's old shoe leather. How bizarre. I had to talk to a chemist and see how you get old shoe leather out of hops and smoke. Golly, it is apparent. All right, here we go. Wow. Really knocked down the grainy vanilla character now. And now the body of this whiskey it's got a nice body to it, but it's a very neutral kind of flavor. I mean, nothing's really standing out. The hops are really gone. The lemony, honey, all that stuff is kind of gone. On the finish, that bitterness is actually gone until I get into the very end of the finish, and now it's just kind of lingering there on the tongue. So let me put it this way. It's drinkable, but it actually became less interesting after doing that. Yeah, it's nice. There's a little hint of smoke on the finish, and maybe a little mint comes in there at the finish, but it didn't quite blend the way that I wanted it to. It almost just neutralized what was interesting about both and made it into something to drink, and that's about it. So, all right, I'm 1 for 1, because that GlenDronach wild turkey thing, I don't know how, but it actually ended up being a pretty interesting blend, whereas this one, I don't know. I think it's just a mixing of two worlds that don't need to mix. Maybe it's that whole argument between the Scots and the Irish about who brought whiskey to the world. Who knows? But it was worth a shot. And, you know, hey, if I inspire you guys to maybe try a couple of mixes, I say don't dedicate a whole bottle and just like add. I very easily could have just dumped some of this into that whole bottle, but that's way too risky for me. If I like that whiskey on its own, I'm not going to do that. If I don't like that whiskey, then I'm probably not going to care, and then I'll dump some other stuff in it until I get it to where I want it to be. But there's a whole movement out there to create infinity bottles. But I think you could also get into this world of blended bourbons that's going on, and of course blended scotches have been around forever, that think about maybe saving a bottle that you don't really appreciate so much by playing around and seeing if there's another whiskey you can add to it to make it much more interesting. Hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got a chuckle out of my mashup and how I can screw up a whiskey, just a glass full, luckily in this particular case. But anyway, until next time, cheers and Slainte. It's not bad. It's just devoid of personality now. Interesting.